Ladies and gentlemen, let's get this show on the road, shall we? My name is Paul Sims, speaking to you from Impatient Health Towers in London, UK. And I'm so happy that you guys are here. It's going to be an interesting session today. I know a lot of you came to the session I ran recently called Musk Farmer, which was designed to be a little bit of an experimental session to see what people would do and what our industry might look like if we were to have an alternative future, an alternative type of CEO. This session is not designed to be quite as controversial, but it's still, I hope, going to be a challenging one. And I'm really excited to say that, firstly, this important topic has been really popular. We've got just over 900 of you, I think, registered, so that's obviously great. But we've also got some fantastic panelists who are going to join me for the second half of today's session. The first half is going to be myself, and then my wonderful colleague Noreen will be actually asking you to do a little bit of work for a change, because you obviously haven't done any work yet today. She's going to get your sleeves rolled up, and we're going to have some interesting stuff from her. But yes, this session, the patient pivot, how patient partnerships can inspire new visions, can restructure teams, can reframe go-to-market processes. Those are quite lofty goals, but I genuinely believe that we are underinvesting in how we do this at the moment. And that's not just because I wear rose-tinted glasses and I'm very compassionate about patients. It's because on a structural level, this is a shift that is happening in our industry, and it's a shift we need to make at home as well. So, as I said before, we've got some lovely panelists. I will introduce them to you shortly. But for now, I want to actually remind you guys that you answered a question when you signed up for this webinar. Some of you may not remember that. It was a while ago. Some of you signed up recently and will remember. But let's have a look. We actually did two questions. The first one is in front of you right now. Which of the following phrases describes most closely your opinions on farmers-patient engagement today? And I was unusually generous here. I normally allow you to only choose one in my surveys. This time I allowed you to choose more, so don't shout at me if this doesn't add up to 100%. But as you can see, patchy is the highest scorer with a quarter of the votes. And 2.1% of you actually saying it's not where farmers should invest. I guess you guys, whoever you are intrigued by this whole area, but not committed to it. Only 15%, if you look at the top right, are saying it's heading in the right direction. So I think we have work to do. That is obviously very, very key. There's a lot of people who are focusing on superficial or, only on the most visible and active patients, which we know can skew results the wrong way if we are genuinely interested in insights that matter. The other question I asked you, and this one isn't really relevant to today's topic, if I'm honest, but it was more of an intrigue. I really wanted to know the answer to this because I've debated it for a decade at least. And that is, to centralize or to decentralize? That is the question. To democratize is how I actually phrased it here. What do you believe in most? And most people, just over half of you, said it should be democratized, which is very interesting because I know plenty of people, hello Wendy Erler if you're listening, who have tried to democratize within their organizations and have found it very difficult. People don't do it, quite simply. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen well enough. And so they've actually had to re-centralize in order to make sure that happens. So there is something, again, fundamentally wrong here about our engagement and our sense of what we're responsible for and our, of course, incentives and actions and responsibilities that we have internally. Only less than a quarter people saying it should be centralized. Okay, right. Let me get into the meat of it. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about this subject, just mainly to stimulate you a little bit. I also want to let you know that if you do enjoy this kind of conversation, if you enjoy not just sticking with the status quo and being the vanilla option, then please come and join us in person. We're running these events now. They're called Farmageddon. And the next one is actually happening in the US in New York on June 11th and 12th. And of course, it will be happening in Europe as well in September. And we would be massively excited if you were to come along in person and, just destroy this industry, but remake it again. That's the whole point of this name, Farmageddon. And we really, really want to rebuild from the ashes and rethink how we would do it if we started all over again. So it's a very cathartic event for those of you who are interested. And I hope that the aim is that it's the meeting place for the disruptors in our industry, the natural home. So I want to start with Cinderella. Yeah, I know, not what you were expecting. I want to start with Cinderella because we love the classic rags to riches story. And Cinderella is the original rags to riches, literally, story. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. We love these stories, but of course, they take place in all sorts of different contexts. I mean, you get the Rockies, you know, from rags to riches, becoming the ultimate champion, of course. You get the Slumdog Millionaires, going from, you know, poverty through a game show to a lot more. And you even get the, you know, social networks and the stories that we enjoy of rags to riches. And Hollywood has kind of tuned into our natural desire to see people go from nothing. And we, of course, imagine that we can do the same. We dream of those riches when we go to bed. We think it's a foregone conclusion that it will happen to us in our lives, and that, you know, in pharma, we will have incredible levels of success going forward. Woohoo! Unfortunately, this is in reality something of a fantasy. I think we all know that. And no matter how wonderful you are, it is unlikely, I'm afraid, that you are going to have a fragrance named after you at some point in your life. Some of you will be very pleased that this will never happen. But we still just love the idea that, you know, going from A to B in success over time will be a nice, smooth, straight line without any hiccups. Does this ever happen? Hell no, of course not. There is always at least a dip at some point in the line, a hiccup. In fact, the reality is that there are plenty of hiccups and dips, and, you know, nothing ever goes smoothly, does it? Certainly nothing important and worth achieving. If you want, you can actually read an entire book about this. Seth Godin's The Dip was quite an influential book to me when I first started my career. And he talks about how this journey never happens and how we go away avoiding it. But, you know, when we hit those dips in everyday life, you know, we hit the traffic jams, the traffic problems of today, then it's very obvious what the solution should be. You know, we simply need to take an alternative route to get to our destination. And, you know, that's become a part of everyday life. And so it's very easy to say that the pivot part of today's session, the patient pivot, is just about, you know, the traffic jams of life and taking an alternative route. Some of you may have seen that back in 2021, there was a very popular app called Clubhouse, kind of lived for a year and then kind of died again. And for some unusually crazy reason, with David Hunt, I actually ran an event on Clubhouse every single working day in the whole of 2021. I know, crazy. And on Wednesdays, the event was called the Pharma Fuck Up. Yes, I said that word, but it's got a PH, so please let me off. And this was all about failures. And every time I had a guest who would come up on the stage and, yes, speak publicly about the screw-ups, the regrets, the failures, the cringes that they experienced throughout their career. Gary Monk, my first guest here, he burnt down a lab in his first week in pharma. That set the tone. It was a hydrogen lab as well, by the way. So anyway, Gary was great, and that was, you know, huge fun. And the whole point of this was to make failure more acceptable. You've heard of startups doing very similar activities. But what I began to notice was a pattern emerging. Everyone who came onto my stage said the same thing. That was not what I was expecting. And I represent that with this picture here. This is tumbleweed. And what we found was that everyone, without fail, anyone who'd been in the industry more than a few years, had spent weeks, months, years developing some kind of campaign, initiative, app, whatever it was, patient support program, whatever it was, and it failed. Nobody came, nobody wanted to be part of it. It was just their family and maybe their pet dog that actually signed up to this thing, and it was a giant failure. And you know what? This leads me often into a conversation about agility, because there's no excuse. This is inexcusable today. We have the technology, we have the process understanding to make sure that it should never be the case that we in our industry invest gazillions in something, whether time or money or effort, and it goes nowhere. We should know what's going to happen. So when we think about this squiggly line, we need to understand that process. We need to understand what customers, patients, consumers, HCPs, everyone is going to actually think when we finally get to that B line. And what I also want to talk about here is that a patient pivot isn't just about finding the alternative route to get to your destination. It's about finding a whole new destination altogether. So imagine instead of going from A to B, you actually discovered along the path there is C. And C is a better place to be than actually B ever was. Wouldn't that be great? Well, the funny thing is that this does happen a lot in R&D. If you're in the UK, there's a drama that's just recently been released called Men Up, which is the story of the accidental discovery of Viagra's potent effects among the male population. And it's an amusing story of a group of people in Wales who were part of the clinical trial process. And this is obviously a very famous example of where our original intentions allowed us to get to that destination C that we weren't expecting. But this stuff happens all the time in R&D. You know, you have medicines like Ilaris that was intended for arthritis and ended up being used for heart disease. You've got, you know, Latisse, which was intended for eye pressure and approved instead for boosting eyelashes. You've got, you know, can't even say the name, Petia, which was swollen prostate, and then finally actually approved for baldness. By the way, they are often known under different medication names, of course, for their new approvals, but the underlying formula and molecules are the same. I think even the classic and big story of the moment, the GLP-1s, are indeed, in fact, they were originally designed for duodenal ulcer disease. How many of you knew that? In the original formulation. It was only later that it was formulated for glucose regulation and type 2 diabetes, and then, of course, later for weight loss. But of course, we all know there are studies for heart failure that have been quite successful, and Novo Nordisk is putting a lot into things like Alzheimer's to see if the same medicine can be solved. So this stuff happens in R&D all the time. Why do we find it so hard to do it outside of R&D? And you'll often hear me say, we are an industry that's full of scientists, or sorry, we are a scientific industry, but only in R&D. You know, we need more scientists outside R&D. Patient engagement is seen far too often as a tick box exercise. It is a one and done. It is something that we feel that we might be obliged to do, but it's not actually part of the development process, and that's a problem. Many reasons for this. One of them, if you're a behavioral scientist, is loss aversion. The pain from the loss, the patient is actually higher than the pleasure from the gain in so many situations. And we naturally become conservative as an industry. Do we have to endure this pain of finding out the truth from patients? Is that going to be more painful than the gain from otherwise knowing what's successful? We also suffer a lot from confirmation bias. We tend to ignore evidence that doesn't fit with our worldview, even when it is evidence. And yes, we call ourselves a scientific industry, but we are very guilty of this as well. Where it doesn't coincide with our beliefs, we choose to ignore it, not necessarily choosing it as a person, but choosing it structurally. I ran a webinar last year, and you may notice that two of the people from that webinar are on today's webinar too. That's Jan and Desiree. But one of the people, Kevin, gave a short talk in this webinar about behavioral science and how we've been getting patient journeys wrong and what we need to do about it. And he made some interesting points. Firstly, pharma made over $20 trillion over the last 20 years by focusing on HCPs. So is it any wonder that we focus on HCPs? But it's naive. It's naive to think that physicians are still the major drivers of our performance, because performance really depends more and more on patient outcomes. And the reality is that patient behavior is what is driving health today. Clinical trials are, in effect, hypothetical. They are fake world trials, and real world data obviously differs from clinical trials. And that is largely down to the fact that patients are not as logical as you want them to be. 1 in 2 patients do not take their medicine as prescribed. That's a $528 billion cost. But majority of us, the majority even of physicians, assume that they do. So only behavioral science will help you understand. You need a behavioral framework. And of course, patients spend an average of only 2 hours a year, which is 0.025% of their time in a clinical setting. It's a very small snapshot that you can't rely on. Kevin also went to talk on about the peak end rule, which is, again, is a very important concept that you must understand if you're working in this context, because the truth is that when we look back on a situation, we tend to remember the peaks and we tend to remember the end. If you're a Hollywood director, you try to make the end of your movie better than the beginning because that's the bit that people remember. So you have to obviously acknowledge that when patients recount their journeys, they're going to be talking about the peaks and the end because those are the bits that that are most notable to them. You have to understand this. If you're going to take an ethnographic approach, you're going to pull in those patient transcripts and videos, you're going to pull in that epidemiological and disbursement data, and you're actually going to put it into a quantitative analysis in order to create that patient journey and experience map at the end of the day. Hats off, by the way, to Kevin Dolgen for this picture. It's absolutely critical that we take a more ethnographic and open-minded approach. And that is indeed what's going to move the needle going forward and allow us to make those pivoting moments. A quick word about a guy that many of you will have heard of. His name's Rory Sutherland. He's at Ogilvy in the UK. And he believes in behavioral science well beyond clinical science. And he, in fact, hates the idea that in the UK, they withdrew a lot of the headache medication because ultimately they were selling the same active substance, 400 milligrams of ibuprofen, as you can see in this instance, and consumers were being cheated by having to spend often an order of magnitude more money on the branded version. But he hated this because the truth is your headache does actually get cured better by the branded version. That psychological placebo effect is absolutely critical, and behavioral science should be considered just as importantly as clinical science in the curing of individuals. I posted something, oh, interesting. God, suddenly went very close there. I apologize for that. I posted something on LinkedIn a while ago, and it was the idea of Rory Sutherland saying that if you had an oncology treatment, you wouldn't want it to be pineapple flavored. He was illustrating that we believe the medicinal powers if something is slightly unpleasant to taste. And if it's too nice, you don't actually believe in it. And that's actually a factor in how better you feel at the end of the day. Well, what did the industry think when I posted this? They did not like it at all. About 75% of the comments were very, very negative. I find the statement offensive, dumb. It would not help if it tasted worse. The opinions of Mr. Marketing are callous and appalling. They're damaging. This is tone deaf, ill thought through, poorly articulated. Friction of the mind. These people are facing death. It's sufficient friction. Well, all of those things may be true, but they're also assumptions, you could say, at the end of the day. They're assumptions that say, I know what the patient is feeling. I know what's best for the patient. And actually, it's the behavioral scientists on the other side, about 25% of the comments that were very positive. And it was all about how we are blinkered in our industry to thinking about what we know is best. And that illogical side of industry. In fact, Rory tends to look at patients not as logical, not as illogical, but psychological, something in the middle of those two. And understanding that science is where we need to go. He ultimately thinks that we need to stop acting like Julius Caesar in our companies, giving things the yes or the no according to our own personal whim and our own arrogance at the end of the day as to whether or not something should succeed or not. This is why we need to operate as if we have a patient in the boardroom, around the meeting table, wherever we are making decisions, and enabling that person to be as close as possible to the decisions so that they are deciding where we go. This is agility. This is agility. This is ensuring that an uncertain environment, the patient environment, isn't a scary forest like the one we see right now, but a welcoming and encouraging place for people to be. The market must decide, or should I say, the patient must decide, or the person, even better, must decide, not you. You cannot be arrogant any longer. I actually advocate the idea that we implement something like holistic trials. This is a name that I've just invented to try and improve the importance of this type of activity and to consider it's just as important as the clinical trials, but we need something far broader and more scientific for non-clinical use. And we need to take the lessons from agility. Agility is about learning in extreme uncertainty. There is nothing more uncertain than patients' lives in so many cases, and that is what I want to see us do more of. And finally, my final point is that I think that going forward, we should measure our productivity of what we're doing in pivots, not in anything else. Okay, that was a few words from me. Oh, another picture there, a few words from me. That's my sort of opening thing. I would love to see the chat window come to life at this point. I would love to see you guys, firstly, saying hello if you haven't already, but also telling me whether or not you think that I'm right or wrong and giving me some of your opinions there. I also want to launch a quick poll question. So if you look at your screen now, you should see something crop up. And this actually is a question that came up in the plans when we were discussing this event with the panelists prior. And it's the notion of being healthy, defining being healthy. What does it mean to be healthy? Who should primarily define what healthy actually means in the context of chronic conditions going forward? Is it the individual? Is it the patients? Is it healthcare professionals who you could argue right now today are the people who define what healthy and healthy isn't for many of us? Is it a collaborative effort? And that's possibly the easy option, but what does that actually mean? Should be defined by standard clinical guidelines. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Half of you have already voted. Thank you very much. It's good to see that you're still awake. And yeah, I'm going to close this in about 3 seconds. It's quite a simple question. So 3, 2, 1. Let's have a quick look at the answers. Thank you to the nearly all of you who voted. I'm glad to see you're all still awake. Well, there's a clear answer. Maybe I shouldn't have allowed this collaborative one. It's just too easy, but over 2/3 of you actually said that. 25, a quarter of you saying it should be down to the individuals. Only 3% say healthcare and professionals and medical researchers, or similar amount for standard clinical guidelines. I think that's very, very interesting myself. It shows that you all believe that a shift needs to be made. Right. My colleague Noreen should be waiting patiently and can hopefully turn her video on at this point and wave to everybody as she's going to take it to the next stage. So Noreen, over to you. Oh, ignore all this stuff. This is clearly a hangover from previous things. There you go, Noreen.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thanks, Paul. So Paul mentioned at the beginning that we actually want you to roll up your sleeves and try this out for yourself. And one of the things that we mentioned, and we actually do quite a bit at Inpatient Health, is futures thinking. It's not just thinking about the alternatives out there, but actually getting your hands dirty and seeing those worlds and seeing those alternative futures. So if you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab a piece of paper or pen. If you're en route, if you're on a train or in a commute, obviously if you're driving, do not grab a pen and a piece of paper. But if you are somewhere around where you don't have a sheet of paper and a pen, then go ahead and just use your phone, a note on there. It's nice to write this down as you're thinking about it, because there is quite a bit that we'll get through in the next 10 minutes or so. So if we move on, once you've got that pen and paper, on the left side, we'd like for you to draw a circle, very simple circle. And if we move on that, inside that circle, we'd like for you to just write one specific action that you'd like to explore for patient engagement. Now, Paul has given us quite a few ideas, quite a few things for us to consider, but really bring it back down to yourselves. What is something that you think, okay, I could do this feasibly, realistically, viably in my organization with my team, an action that you think you can explore. And I've given you an example here. So I'll guide you a little bit through the exercise so that you're not hanging out alone. But I've put here developing disease awareness educational content. So that's the one example that I will run with. If you want to put your example in the chat as well, feel free to do so, but just make sure you've got it down in that circle. All right. Now, once you've got something down, once you've got an action down, and of course you can do this exercise multiple times, but we just want to do it once. If we move on, the next thing that we want you to do is actually draw 3 circles to the right. So Paul, if we click on one more time, you'll have 3 circles to the right, just like I've drawn here. And this is where we actually start to think about those futures. Oftentimes when we need to make a decision, we do this in our heads automatically. We go, ooh, should I do my laundry now? Or should I do it tomorrow, right before my flight? Well, if I do it now, I'm gonna have to fold the clothes now. But if I do it tomorrow, I can just do it and then immediately put it in my suitcase and then head out the door. This is my current dilemma, right? So we immediately think of those options or those potential futures in our head. And the difference in writing it down is that we get to explore them even further. So in this first instance, we want you to think about 3 different scenarios. If you do that action, what's the best case scenario? What is that ultimate outcome, the golden kind of opportunity that you have available? What is then the worst case scenario? And sometimes I will say this is our default that we think about. We think, oh gosh, I couldn't involve patients because compliance will get me. It will just be a hot mess, right? So we want you to explore that, lean into that a little bit, make it one of your 3 scenarios, right? And then the third one is what you think will likely happen. This is the realist in you, okay? So if we click on just a little bit, I'll share with you a couple of the ideas that I had. So in the best case scenario, I said, okay, well, it's the go-to resource. It is the ticket item that everyone uses to address my sort of disease that I'm working on or the therapy area. Worst case scenario, nobody uses it. HCPs don't use it. They're not giving it to their patients. KOLs ignore it out in the field of the available resources that people can use. And then the likely scenario, if we do one more click on, is that some people use it, but actually it becomes less and less engaging over time. Omnichannel becomes even more than omnichannel, and the content can't be used in the right format, in the right method. It needs to be constantly refined. Eventually, that content just isn't really applicable. Okay, so this is my 3 scenarios that I've thought of. Now, this is where it gets fun, because you've thought of three futures. You think, Noreen, I could do that without a piece of paper and a pen, right? Or without my notes. But now we want to go one step further, and we're going to play out the impact that each of those futures, each of those scenarios has on 3 different stakeholders. And this is actually the same 3 stakeholders that you all have mentioned contribute to defining what is healthy. So we want to look at, in each of those scenarios, what is the impact on the patients, on the business, your team, your organization, and on the industry at large. Now, the third one might be a bit tricky because you think, well, Noreen, I am, just someone that works at an organization. I can't really extrapolate so far and tell you how much this is going to impact pharma as a whole. But this is where we really have to disrupt the status quo by leaning into it, right? If we don't think about what it's going to do for the industry, and it does have an implication on how we look at the industry, then we can't actually effectively move forward with that decision. So once you've got your 3 scenarios, we then invite you to think about each of the impacts. Now, for this particular one, I've actually done it, but I've not written it out for you because this one can take a bit of time. So even if you might not be able to finish the exercise now, I encourage you to at least do 3 of the 9 kind of outcomes of the futures. But what you can see happen is you have this array, almost this tree of different futures that you get to carry out. You've got 9 futures, 9 alternatives, 9 options. And boy, do we like options, right? Because from that, we can choose the one that we think is best. So if we move on just one more time, you now get this beautiful decision around the patient pivot, right? Around what you want to actually do. And this is that pivot or persevere moment. You're going to look at those 9 futures that you create and say, okay, if I think about that action and I think about how that action is going to help or support patient engagement, do I actually want to pursue that action? Do I want to carry it out through one of those futures? Do I maybe need to shift it a bit? Is it not going to have the impact that I want it to have on the business, on the patients, on pharma? None of these outcomes, none of these futures are actually hitting the mark for me. Maybe I need to go back and make it bolder, stronger. Maybe I need to shift it completely. Or is it that I just need to consider a different idea altogether? Now, this is actually a very simple exercise. We've run through it in about 10 minutes. And I encourage you to actually just try it, just see it through. And the reason why I say that is because this activity can be done individually, but it can also be done in a team as a full-on exercise. This is something that we've done in Pharmageddon, the event that we host and will be hosting as well this year. But it's also something that allows you the opportunity to actually be empowered yourselves, as well as work with other stakeholders to actively engage patients. So what I'd love for you all to do is finish this activity either on your own, or if you have, then please do post in the chat and tell us what your reflections are from it. But you can even do this as in the beginning of a team meeting, the first 5-10 minutes could be spent to doing this exercise. And we encourage you to do it, to just think about that question. Do you want to pivot from what you're currently doing, or do you want to persevere on the path that you're on? And that can go either way. So thank you for indulging me in that activity. Like I said, if you enjoyed that, there's more of that Pharmageddon. But I would love now for our panelists to actually come and be a part of the discussion. And I'll hand it back over to Paul to begin that for us.
Thank you, Noreen, and really appreciate your energy in doing that. And obviously, this is something that we work on a lot with various different people. If that's something that you want to do with your teams, then very happy to help. A lot of you in the chat window, it's lovely, but you're writing just to me. You're writing to hosts and panelists, and unfortunately, nobody else can see what you're saying. So please make sure that that little blue drop-down box is on everyone so that we can all enjoy what you have to say. And obviously, if you did post something just to me, maybe you want to repost it. As you can see, I have been joined by some lovely smiling faces. You can see them both on the slides, but even better than that, you can see them in reality. So why don't I just get rid of the slides altogether, and then you've got the full spectrum of talent that we have in the room. Very quick word about each of them. Desiree is the one on my screen in the top right. She's at Otsuka. She's worked across multiple roles, and in my opinion, has always been one of the most patient-oriented people that we have in our industry. Very fortunate to have you here, Desiree, doing some really interesting stuff. Another person working in the mental health area is Agath, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know quite well over the last year. She's got more than 20 years of experience really trying to drive the patient agenda at Lundbeck. She's also a specialist in market access and global pricing, and obviously brings a really strong ethic there. Very interesting work being done in health equity now as well. Jan is a longtime friend, collaborator, provocateur, crazy person all around, who I very much appreciate. And as you saw was at the webinar last time, I absolutely love Jan and just the incredible sparring conversations that we have. He's dedicated his career, not just in pharma, but turning ideas into reality, and is enthusiastic advocate for humanity. And he's a global patient experience lead working in T1D at Sanofi. One of the great people, and has his colleague Verla, who wanted to be a doctor growing up, I believe, but found she had a love for other things, languages, and she describes herself as also a person living with type 1 diabetes, but also works very closely with Jan and Sanofi in making sure that what the company does is key. You've already met Noreen, my wonderful head of consulting. She's very enthusiastic and capable talent that I'm very lucky to be able to work with every day. And the same goes for Jeff, who is my head of research and spends a lot of his time finding out what we in our industry are actually doing, and has a huge number of insights there that can be tapped into, especially around this topic of patient engagement and treating patients as people, not just clinical subjects. So thank you so much, everyone. I always say start with why. So I like to start with a patient or person's perspective. So I haven't warned her in advance, but Veerle, I would love to just hear your reflections on what's come so far. And I want you to just get the conversation going here about what you think is the gap we are facing right now in terms of being able to do patient engagement and make those pivots. I'd love to hear whether you agree with what I said at the beginning as well. So Veerle, over to you.
Thank you. I don't think we have time to go into all of it, so I'll try to keep it brief. And I think some of the points we already mentioned, right? Is it a patient who decides who is healthy? What makes somebody healthy? That's where the conversation starts. And I think, especially for us in pharma, sometimes we believe we really know what the people we are working for, because that's how I see it. These are the people we're working for, need. And we kind of forget to ask if that's just our assumptions or whether that's actually how it feels and how people experience that. And if we look at what we're doing now, I think a lot of it feels like it's check boxes, and a lot of companies will check the boxes and ask some people or some people that they might know. And it's always interesting because those people are most of the time the people that are already very engaged and that are already very involved. So the question always there is also, how representative are they for the rest of the population, for the rest of the people with an illness? And I can say from my own perspective that I am not a very stereotypical person living with type 1 diabetes. So I think there's also a very big challenge there. How do we grow that group of people that we engage? How do we change the patient story to include everyone with the disease and not the limited group that is probably very vocal?
Okay. Thank you, Veerle. I want to hear from Jan, who obviously is your colleague, and I want to hear what your perspective is in working with Veerle and how that makes a difference, and of course, how you've been able to get towards a more agile situation at Sanofi.
You know, you mentioned in your presentation the fact that engagement is actually something that we should do because it makes things relevant into the go-to-market. And I think that there's something that can replace the go-to-market. I would call it go-to-life. Because ultimately, the recipients of everything we do, should it be medication that we create or treatment solution, the actual users are people who are living with the condition and their care teams. They make the decision about going for the medication and taking it, or taking the solution or not. They are making the decision. So the earlier we involve them in the stages, the deeper we involve them, the more intense or the more frequent the involvement is, the greater will be the fit with their lives. So ultimately, it's about having more speed, more relevance, and it just makes sense from the whole adoption efforts. So the reason why I work with Veerle, who is my colleague, we happened to have a conversation a couple of months ago over a dinner. She's been very kind and disclosed to me in a safe space about her condition. And it came from a very pragmatic stance to do the best we can for the community. And of course, we do it a compliant way, yet it doesn't go further than this. It just makes sense from the very adoption-driven standpoint.
So yeah,
you
you're in a
can't make
fortunate
people use something you haven't done with them for them.
Yeah, and you're in a fortunate position where there's a very low barrier between yourself and Vela. Do you think that we in industry need to find ways, maybe not through employment necessarily, but there need to be more ways in which we reduce that barrier? Or do you think that there needs to be a separation?
So you introduce me as someone who is provocative, and I will actually contradict this, and maybe not. I feel that we have all the processes we need in place to make this engagement happen in various ways that stays compliant. Are we using all those possibilities? Are we creating the impact to the fullest? Are we systematic about this? I think that the right question would be is how systematically are we using this, rather than should there be a barrier? There has been lots of work done over the past 20 years in terms of what we call the patient centricity, patient engagement, and so on. There's lots of frameworks which are in place. Now we just need to use it to make it happen. And to the question that has been in the poll, should it stay separate or democratized? I think that the access to the insight and to the processes should be democratized, because at various levels there are ways to engage with patients. What should be structured centrally is all the insights we collect, so that we avoid that we ask different people the same question again and again. Let's think about centralized repositories. Let's think about open source. This is where I would be heading in my answer.
Desiree, oh, sorry, go for it, Noreen.
No, sorry. It was kind of an open question to folks as well. So maybe Desiree or Agatha, that you might have thoughts on this, but someone in the chat actually asked this, and I thought it was a great question, which is how, when we do that kind of structuring, right? When we've got the process kind of decentralized, but then, one team is sort of holding the insights. How do we look at KPIs and metrics? So is it that, every team is responsible for that? Are there certain individuals? Are there certain metrics? I'd be interested to hear if folks kind of have thoughts on that. Something we think about a lot with our clients, but, it'd be great to see if you guys have examples of the best way to do it.
Great challenge, then, Noreen. I would love to hear how that's being measured and distributed and encourage that democratization of the insights. Desiree, sorry, you were talking, and I would love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Absolutely. So I agree with Jan. I think that the insights absolutely have to be democratized. That's really important. What I will say is I think that in particular has been one of the biggest challenges, because there are so many great insights that are coming, and I'm fortunate I have a team that talks directly to patients and care partners based here in the US. I know in the UK it's not always the same sort of situation, but we get insights on a daily basis, and we are navigating person to person different situations, and so those insights are so rich. And I think one of the interesting parts too is you might hear an insight from a patient, but then also looking at the data coupled with that, sometimes it validates it and sometimes it's completely different. And so for me personally, I feel like the data and the insights together really build that more holistic story, but it is that individual interaction, individual conversations where you learn so much. I don't have a super special way that we've decided to democratize these insights other than conversations and bringing them forward. So I would love to hear from other people if they have a way to do that. As far as measurement, I'll just touch on that. I mean, for me, being in a patient support program, it's really about helping patients get started on product, stay on product, and optimizing their experience. And we pay a lot of attention to the emotional health and well-being of the patients, kind of regardless of disease state. Since at Otsuka, we really focus on mental health and well-being. So I feel like that's sort of what my team does, but I'm sure across different functions and different things, you're looking at different KPIs. But for us, that's what we're looking at.
Can I add something here that's really interesting? I completely agree with what everybody's saying. So, and I realize we're not necessarily going to come up with a solution on how do you measure impact from a patient engagement activity today. But one of the things that we're finding within the industry, and there's a big gap, that we're all still working in silos, despite some of us kind of moving towards a matrix structure. So I also see kind of different functions have different set of like functional objectives. They're being measured by different KPIs that aren't always patient-centric. And all of this can really create an environment where I feel that there's inconsistent patient-centric strategies that don't necessarily map to an enterprise level or a company level like strategic goal when it comes to patient centricity and engagement. And I think it's worth noting that even patients are feeling this like disparity in these strategies, because different functions are coming to patients with different objectives, and they're being pulled to different areas of the objectives. So I think patients are at the same time feeling this.
Maybe Jeff, I'd
So
like
there's
to indeed,
yeah, please go. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted actually to positively reinforce this view, Jeff, about the importance of bridging functions in one organization. So as you say, there are many great initiatives, either in the global teams or more local. And it's really important to connect these initiatives into a cohesive and holistic strategy. And I think that's what you were also speaking to, this area about the more holistic approach and the better understanding of the perspectives of the person living with the diseases. And with Lundbeck, what we are trying to now implement, it's still work in progress, but it's really this notion of integrated evidence generation, having a framework that really allows to put together all the perspectives, those of the patients first and foremost, of course, but also react to the change of paradigm locally, where we see also other pressure points on making sure that we bring this innovation to patients. So it's really a matter of also taking into consideration all the different aspects that a product will have to go through, and make sure that patient engagement is at the core of each step, making sure that we have these differentiating elements incorporated in our different strategies, and importantly, when it comes to evidence generation strategies. So, and I see different opportunities here to connect with the patients at different time points already from the early phases, making sure that we're able already to readjust and pivot when it comes to a specific product profile, for example, and understanding opportunities of differentiation, and then move that knowledge and learning throughout the drug life cycle. So it's definitely a long endeavor, but something that we see as a trend picking up in pharma, which hopefully will ensure we bring the right treatment to the right patient at the right time.
Thank you, Agath. And I think this notion of these bridging things is very interesting, because if the aim is to pivot, not just in a very superficial and tactical way, but almost at a strategic level, that decision-making power needs to somehow penetrate the organization at a more senior level. I'd love to know what, and I'd love to hear from everyone on this, what does this kind of bridging force look like in reality? Who are these people? Do they have different job titles? And how do we empower the organization to be able to make rapid pivots when very defined insights are gained? I would love to just understand better how we can be more agile organizations as a result of that. And I'm going to, by the way, ask the audience this kind of a similar question at the same time as I get all of you guys to answer as well. So have a look at your screens for that too. What is it that's going to allow us to really pivot internally? Is it these bridging agents that Agath said?
I'll comment quickly. I do think that, at least for me, I think I can have success pivoting. It's because I did a pilot first instead of trying to go full scale right away. So doing little pilots, kind of proving it out, and then being able to pivot based on the learnings and then scaling, I think has been more successful than just trying to build something the ground up and then maybe it fails. I would much rather do it at a smaller scale first.
I would agree with these rays also. I mean, what we discussed briefly when preparing this webinar, I think that having a small scale MVP project that is already ready to be experimented in real life makes it actually easier to get the insights whose impact is immediately visible. And I think it's those small signs of success and small signs of impact that can then build up and create a snowball effect.
Mm. Very interesting use of MVPs, and that's obviously language that is very commonly associated with this whole pivoting and persevering idea. How easy and how realistic is it? How commonplace do you think it is that we can produce these MVPs, or, you know, even just pilots, you could call it that, I guess, but MVP is designed to be more of a real thing. How realistic is it that we can actually pursue that method of building in that change and seeing those products come to life? I've stumped you all.
So maybe I can, well, just maybe adding some thoughts to that. So obviously one of the methods to engage with patients is really asking them about their lived experience with the condition, and hopefully doing this as early as possible in order to integrate these perspectives and check in with our product profile, what are the aspirations we have from a mode of action point of view, and starting to you know, have a first viable solution of a product profile that we think will resonate with patients themselves, and that we can obviously progress also from a technical point of view and from a production point of view, all the aspects of pharma development come into play. So maybe there can be a first opportunity to check in when we are in these very early stages. But of course, an MVP can be on so many different products, one can say. I mean, we're also seeing a trend towards using much more of the digital solutions with patients, being closer to the lived experience again in a daily life, following patients via patient apps. Many successes and also many failures here, and I think you spoke to that very well as well, Paul, in your presentation. We need to try out and take the learnings. So I don't know if we should call them failures, but rather experiments and opportunities and stepping stones for something much better. And that's something we can apply at any stage, really, of the product life cycle. So many opportunities actually to test, pilot, and learn and progress, I would say.
Okay.
I love the idea, Agatha, of reframing it as well as in terms of experiments, because I do think that the word failure has this connotation of, ooh, fear, you know, we don't want to fail. We're all really, you know, motivated and want to do what's the best. But actually, when you look at an experiment, as we do in science, it's a hypothesis that we test. And it's exactly the same kind of framework. I mean, I think the tech industry, you know, has done this successfully. They've reframed it into the agile methodology where you have sprints and you plan. And just by changing that terminology and the way that we look at it, I think really does, from a behavioral science perspective, shift our way of thinking and not make us afraid anymore, and removes that fear. I mean, Paul, you asked the question of how realistic is it? The consumer goods industry has been doing this for ages, right? You know, with consumer like testing and marketing. And I think someone in the chat as well mentioned that they've got an example from Unilever. And, you know, Caroline, I think you mentioned that we've been doing this for ages. It's just, how can pharma start to adopt it? And I think that's where we can get creative with the experiments and the hypotheses that we're willing to test.
I also think,
Noreen, I want to pick up on you. Sorry, Jeff. I want to pick up on you because you mentioned two things: behavior change and consumer industries. I think that in terms of the MVPs, maybe topics like adherence. I think someone on chat, I think it was Victor, who published a new paper on adherence. I think this is a topic that's been around for a decade. It is not a medication-related topic. I mean, medication only work for people who take them, and taking medication is a behavior. So we can work and experiment MVPs on small scales to solve for those topics, and it can be pretty fast. And what pops into my mind, having spent the first half of my career in the consumer good industries, I mean, if people love some products and love some brands, they will pay for their adherence. So how do we bring this desirability, which has nothing to do with science and medical medicine, into healthcare? I think that's another kind of interesting option. And and working with people who live the condition and truly respecting what makes the treatments desirable to them will actually help us move the needle forward.
Yeah. Can I add something to what Noreen said? So when it comes to kind of agile approaches to patient engagement, I mean, we can pivot and experiment all we want, but it really doesn't matter if we don't have the patient trust. And I think that's really important. I think really an underlying foundation of any kind of patient engagement framework should be to establish that trust first with our patients and acknowledge that there is kind of a diversity of lived experiences and not all patients can be grouped together. So obviously we know that person's condition is quite unique and personal to that particular individual, and it doesn't define who they are, right? I think therefore trust is that key. And we can benefit, pharma can benefit by creating these lasting relationships and by connecting with patients on those kind of more human level. It encourages ongoing engagement, which is an agile kind of like methodology. It provides us with a sustained and evolving understanding of what patient needs over time. So I think that's one of the key things that I think we absolutely need to have.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to see if I can squeeze in one final poll question as well, if that's okay, all around the topic of health equity, which of course is super important these days. And I just want to get a quick litmus test on where we're going there. Unfortunately, we're basically running out of time. I'd like a sort of single sentence, single even word, maybe that's too much, single sentence phrase from each of you to finish off with, and I can only give you a sentence on what it is that you feel that we need to do to bring more dynamism to patient engagement and thus more utility and ability to change going forward on Monday morning. So if there's one thing that you would prioritize above all else, and I'm sorry to have to confine you to a sentence, but I'm evil if I didn't establish that already. So Veerle, we started with you, and I'm going to start with you again, if that's okay. I would love to hear what you think we really need to do.
Listen. That's one word. Listen.
That is impressive,
and then to
impressive.
the right
Okay.
people at the right time, but listen. That's, I think, where we start. Don't put answers in people's mouths. Don't think for the people we're trying to help. Listen first and then decide based on that.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Veerle. We need to learn by listening. Jan.
The best way to do things is to do things, so keep finding ways to do things.
That very aligns with what you were saying earlier about experimentation. That's fantastic. Agath.
Yeah, well, I would like to maybe take the angle from a capability perspective in the organization. So maybe grow behavioral science in organizations in order to better capture patients' perspectives of people.
Grow behavioral science, grow behavioral understanding. I love it. Something I spoke about when I came to visit you, as you know. Desiree.
I'll say involve patients, involve cross-functional teams. And I like what Jan said, just start doing things, just go forward and do it.
Get involved, get your sleeves rolled up. Jeff.
I think being healthy doesn't always mean clinically healthy from a patient perspective.
Yes, indeed. And we asked about that earlier. So knowing what healthy means, fantastic. Noreen, I think you might have the final word here.
I would say just try something.
Try.
What's the worst that's going to happen?
Fantastic. Well, let me quickly show you the results of that final poll as well. You can see we've got a bit of a normal distribution there, moderately being nearly 2/5 of the answer there. Guys, thank you so much for being part of this. We at Inpatient Health are working with people every day on trying to make patient engagement agile, more end-to-end, and more dynamic and responsive across. So if that's something that you want to talk to us about, please do indeed talk to us about it. Obviously, I want to say a huge thank you to those of you who've contributed both in the audience, but of course, especially to our panelists today. By the way, I've stuck up a little poll. If you want to do any next steps, you can obviously volunteer for anything that you'd like there. We'd love for you to take part in something at least going forward. I'm sorry we didn't get enough time to go to all of the good questions and comment that we had in the chat. I'll try and make sure that that chat is available with the recording, which of course will be sent to you afterwards, so no need to ask me. And of course, I wish you the very best of success and good fortune as you try, learn, get stuck in, all of the things, experiment, all of the things that we just said. So thank you so much, everybody. It's been a great little journey for you with you for an hour, but I hope that journey is just beginning for you. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch up with you sometime soon.